Hi, it's me, Roosevelt. So, in the Natlan Archon Quest finale, we saw Ronova, the Shade of Death, and apparently she's a mass of crimson eyes hanging out in the sky. If you've been a follower of the channel, you know I love my eldritch beings, but I have also previously made a huge deal about crimson eyes, so you might be able to imagine that this imagery has had me reeling. Now, it's been pointed out by a lot of people that there are some striking similarities between Ronova, Arlecchino, and the Crimson Moon. And I totes agree. But to spoil the punchline, I don't think the red eye in the sky is unique to Ronova. That is, I think it's more of a symbol of enacting the will of the heavenly principles, which Ronova does. And yes, Sitlali does comment saying that that's the form Ronova takes to keep watch over Teyvat. But I wonder if it could also represent any of the shades, or even the heavenly principles themselves. I mean, that's basically the thesis of this video. I just really want to explore some crimson eye imagery in the game. Like, I could totally be wrong about this. But before I get into that, let's recap some obvious parallels between Death and the Crimson Moon dynasty. Like I've said already, a lot of people have been making these comparisons, so I won't belabor the point too much. I'll keep this brief. Arlecchino has a lot of deep red and black eye imagery. Her kit references stuff like death and beheading, and also her signature weapon is a scythe. Her boss form also has wings and spindly spider legs, also adorned with crimson eye spots. So thematically, there's a lot of allusions to death, and the visuals are very reminiscent of what we saw of Ronova. Furthermore, Arlecchino has the lineage of the Bale Moon Bloodfire, which is described as a power, or even a deep-rooted curse, that blackens her arms. With it, she can manipulate a strange fire, and anyone rendered ash by her flames would be turned into after images. Also, her blood can be bottled and used to erase a person's memories. She killed Fatui traitors this way. This special ability of hers is a remnant of the Crimson Moon dynasty, the first dynasty of Khaenri'ah. According to the Crimson Moon semblance, its namesake is from a bunch of priests who convinced the confused king that the Crimson Moon ruled over all. And the book Perrin-Harry originally gave us insight into the direct connection with the Crimson Moon. So they had an orphanage for Outlanders, and the children would go through a ritual of crawling through a dark passage. When Perrin-Harry did this and reached the end, he was asked if he was dead, and he said yes. And with that, he's told he survived the flame of two worlds. So again, themes of death. And during this process, he had a hallucination of a crimson moon turning around, revealing a gigantic, horrified eye, which is apparently a key part of the process. Arlecchino in the Teapot similarly tells us about seeing a crimson moon in her dreams.
I once had a dream. In it, I stood on a vast plain, with a red moon hanging in the sky. The moon rotated gradually, and as I stared at it, it too watched me silently.
She goes on to say,
I cannot describe what it was like to be the object of its gaze, so filled with death and grief. Or was it fear and pity?
This wording also reminds me how the Lord of Night described Ronova as self-pitying. So there do seem to be strong parallels between the Crimson Moon and Ronova, the Shade of Death. But there's a few things that bother me about this, though. Like, first of all, there's the moon thing. I mean, honestly, I think Ronova looks like a rift in the sky with a bunch of smaller eyes. The Crimson Moon, on the other hand, is twice described as an actual moon that rotates to reveal an eye. I mean, this could just be how the Shade of Death is manifested more abstractly in a dream or hallucination, and maybe I'm just getting lost in the details. But I think it's a bit sussy though, given the emphasis on the Moon Sisters and whatever this thing is in the sky. I digress, regardless. But there's also a bigger theme here that I think has less to do with the strict concept of death and one more of memory, although these concepts are very tightly linked. A big theme of Arlecchino and the Crimson Moon dynasty is the Flame of Two Worlds. I've previously explored and argued that the two worlds here are less about life and death, and more about death and new birth, which is all about memory. For example, the Vibrant Pinion mentions the two worlds as well, specifically using this lingo of new birth and death. And there's also Caterpillar of the Narcissenkreuz questline, who has similarly blackened arms as Arlecchino. He was granted new life and memory in a ritual using the Holy Blade of Narcissenkreuz. And there's the implication that he's a rebirth of a gestalt of Narcissenkreuz members. And here's the cherry on top. The Aranara considered death as a one-time loss of memory. We see Aranara, like Arama, die, but it's really just them forgetting their past experiences. In my opinion, it's very similar to Arlecchino's execution of the Fatui traitors. She didn't actually kill them with her Bale Moon Bloodfire, but they don't remember anything about being in the Fatui. And this all gets extra interesting when you actually really think about Arlecchino's special Crimson Moon Dynasty abilities. The Bale Moon Bloodfire creates after-images of people. These are basically ghostly memory snapshots. Arlecchino's childhood friend Clairvy is an extreme example of this. And this after-image manifests as a child version of her, unaware of her fate. All this actually reminds me a lot of Istaroth. That is, do you remember the Sin Shades of Enkanomiya? They're explicitly called after-images by Antigonus. Enjo explains that due to Enkanomiya's properties as a netherrealm, Enkanomiya sometimes projects shadows of the past based on remnant thoughts. Powerful emotions are captured and frozen. But more interestingly, a loading screen tip says that when Istaroth looks upon someone with favor, their feelings and memories will be preserved in the world. So, in a way, Arlecchino's abilities remind me more of Istaroth than Ronova. And this Curse of the Crimson Moon bloodline, in my opinion, seems to be more about memory than death, even though, as I said, they are tightly linked concepts. I want to emphasize, though, that I think this is ultimately bigger than what Istaroth and Ronova handle separately on their own, and perhaps more linked to their boss, the CEO of Teyvat. For example, consider this. The ley lines were created by the Heavenly Principles to protect against the Abyss. And they're the conduit of all memory in Teyvat. So if everything I've been talking about has more to do with memory, I would personally relate that more to the Shades as a whole and the Heavenly Principles. Now, I could totally be wrong about all of this, but this discussion so far has only really focused specifically on the Crimson Moon Dynasty. There's also a lot of eye imagery in general that makes me think the Crimson Eye may be more emblematic of the Heavenly Principles. First off, here's an obvious thing. The intro scene with the unknown god. The cubes are covered with the simplified Crimson Eye symbols. Although they have similar aesthetics, I think it's safe to say that Ronova is not the unknown god who separated the Traveler from their sibling. But wait, there's more. There's also A in the Raiden Shogun. Just as the Anemo Archon is the god of freedom, and the Geo Archon is the god of contracts, the Electro Archon is the god of eternity. 7 ideals for 7 gods, and of these, eternity is nearest unto the Heavenly Principles. So the whole deal behind the Vision Hunt Decree was that visions represent ambition, which leads to progress, and progress is dangerous. So stasis is the chosen form of eternity. There is more to it, though. Zhongli points out that because visions are a gift of the divine, perhaps the Raiden Shogun wants to keep them under the sole dominion of the divine. Thus, why she placed them on the statue of the omnipresent god. And, according to an achievement, the statue is a symbol of eternity, which, again, is closest to the Heavenly Principles. I just really want to emphasize the connection between A and eternity with the Heavenly Principles, because there's a lot of red eye and crimson moon imagery surrounding A. For example, in her plane of euthymia, there's a red moon. Playable Raiden skill is called Baleful Omen, and it conjures a giant eye shape. The Raiden boss even has a red eye on her back. And of course, there's the omnipresent god statue with eyes in its wings, which look very red in a cutscene. So, if the red eye or crimson moon were strictly a symbol of Ronova or death, why would it be so prevalent in the Nation of Eternity? Again, going back to my point, I think it's more emblematic of the shades as a group or a whole, or the heavenly principles. The crimson eye represents the gaze of the gods. So I don't think this sounds too unreasonable, which means I have not gone off the rails as much as I want to. So let's get a little bit more creative. Heavy speculation for this next part. But we've had a super important crimson eye since the beginning of the game. I mean, aside from the intro cutscene, everybody's so creative. Sitlali is a hermit nerd who loves light novels. Minor spoilers for her Tribal Chronicles quest, 321. When you enter her abode, you can see light novels scattered on her desk and bookshelf. One of the books prominently featured is Flowers for Princess Fischl, and in her birthday voice line, she wants to gift you a copy of Flowers for Princess Fischl. Uh-oh, Grandma Roosevelt is about to go off the deep end with the books. Wait, listen, hear me out. Let me explain why I think these references are very intentional. Side note, as usual, when I refer to Fischl, I mean the book character. This is the character that playable Fischl, aka Amy, cosplays as. Princess Fischl is the Prinzessin der Verurteilung, or the Princess of Condemnation. She is a character from the Mr. 9 novels, Legend of the Shattered Halberd, and Flowers for Princess Fischl. In the latter, she's an outlander and traveler of worlds, and sovereign of the Immernachtreich. That's the Evernight Kingdom, a small and forbidden paradise that she created. Princess Fischl notably has mystical sight, and can see all fate in the world, and renders judgment at the end of time. To that end, she's considered a world beast. At the end of the universe, she will swallow all dreams, grant benediction to souls, and cleanse the ugly and wicked. According to Mitternacht's Waltz, Fischl has borne witness to countless stories and their endings, with her mystical sight. And extra notably, Fischl canonically has crimson eyes as red as rubies. Here's what I'm getting at. The source of Fischl's mystical sight is the Auge der Verurteilung, or Eye of Condemnation. So her Eye of Condemnation does see the end for many things, and if you want to be very reductive, then sure, it could be about death. After all, the fate of all worlds is inexorable entropic destruction, and their final destination is the realm in waiting of the Prinzessin, the Evernight Kingdom. But what I would argue is that this is more than just about death. The Eye of Condemnation sees not only the threads of fate, but all that is true in the world. And it's super important to note that the entire reason behind her role as a princess of judgment and condemnation is to punish sin and sinners. And she must punish sin because sin defies fate's rightful decree. So at this point, you might be able to imagine the parallel I want to make. Fate is just the puppet strings that the heavenly principles use to control Teyvat. Fate and heavenly principles have even been used synonymously before. I mean, remember Focalor's plan. She wanted to deceive the heavenly principles and fate itself, but she couldn't do this under their watchful eyes. So the plan had to be enacted outside of their purview in order to save Fontaine. Because as Nicole said, just as prophecies are usually only the future as seen from the perspectives of the gods, could things be happening in hidden corners where the gods' gaze does not fall? So I do think there is a striking similarity between Fischl's Eye of Condemnation that sees all threads of fate and the watchful eyes of the heavenly principles. But there's even more. Fischl is an exiled princess traveling from world to world, witnessing the fate of many civilizations. You could easily compare this to Traveler, who Lilupar compares to exiled royalty as well. And of course, Traveler travels the stars. Fischl is also a world beast, which reminds me of Canotila's description. She saw Traveler as a monster that looks like it could swallow the whole world in a single bite. And finally, playable Fischl constantly compares herself to Traveler, staying in character to book Fischl, even describing herself as a descender. And this is the really key part here. Long ago, I argued that Legend of the Shattered Halberd is an allegory for the Gnosis and Descenders. meaning that Fischl herself is at least an allegory for a descender. And aside from Traveler, who is the only other descender that we know of? Nahida had speculated this, but Washaklahun Uba Khan seemed to confirm it, the Heavenly Principles. So I wonder if, like Fischl, the Heavenly Principles has this all-seeing crimson eye of fate. Okay, pause. So maybe Sitlali's references to Fischl are just cute little Easter eggs, but there are a few other things I wanted to point out. Remember how when you first enter Natlan, you can name your little Saurian buddy? Like Wanderer, there are some restricted names. One of them is an out-of-left-field choice, Tazrak. If you remember from the second Golden Apple Archipelago, Tazrak is an evil dragon in the stories of Flowers for Princess Fischl. And not just any dragon. During a fated battle with Tazrak, the dragon scorched Fischl's heart, turning her eyes red. So I think it's pretty weird that they would restrict this specific name and then have Fischl references surrounding Sitlali, during the same patch where we see the red eyeball mass of Ronova. Also, fun fact, the open book on her desk has text you can read. It says, "Hearken well, Osvaldo Harafnavins, the sovereign of the Immanachreich weepeth not. Who among those born into this world are not burdened with sin?" This is also obviously from Flowers for Princess Fischl. I dunno, but considering Fischl's crimson eye of condemnation and witnessing fate and judgment, it seems like a super oddly specific detail to include. Going back to the Crimson Moon Dynasty, based on what I've said, it seems that perhaps the Crimson Moon may represent the Heavenly Principles. Which would be super weird because according to Dane, Khaenri'ah has always been a godless nation. But perhaps the Crimson Moon Dynasty was just very different from the Eclipse Dynasty. Perhaps the Crimson Moon Dynasty was maybe more like Enkanomiya, a vestige of the unified civilization that sunk after the War of the Second Throne. Before Sun and Moon does acknowledge that the gods and the shades had basically abandoned them except for Istaroth. This could make for an interesting comparison because early Enkanomians did apparently worship a scaleless imaginary serpent, Ouroboros, and we have seen at least one snake that does have a single crimson eye. Okay, I digress, I'm just thinking out loud right now. Regardless, the Eclipse Dynasty did reject the Crimson Moon Dynasty's values in favor for humanity and their progress above all else. Anyway, one final note about Crimson Eyes. I will not get over the fact that the Dagger Bandit, played by Kaeya, has a single crimson eye as well. Oh, did you think you could get away with me not mentioning Kaeya, ooh? Okay, but seriously, I have mentioned in many other videos similarities drawn between Kaeya and Fischl. Kaeya and Fischl do have reciprocal voice lines about their eye patches, and Fischl insinuates that Kaeya also has mystical sight. So if a crimson eye represents the gaze of the gods, and Fischl has ruby red eyes that can see fate, then Kaeya must also have a ruby red eye that can see fate, and thus Kaeya is God. Thank you. Actual final note. I made a lot of points about memory versus death here. I have way more many thoughts about memory in general from recent Natlan content, but that's a treat for another time. That's all I have for now. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment with your own theories, and also, have you checked your smoke detector batteries recently? Okay, bye for real this time.